My name is Archie McIntyre, and I'm the executive director here at the farm. It's great to have such a huge turnout on our first evening of the summer. Thank you all for coming. What couldn't be a better evening for a little gathering at your community farm? I'd like to ask just briefly, who has been to the farm before? Excellent. Great show of hands. Now, the opposite is who hasn't been here yet? Well, welcome everybody who's not been here, and of course, welcome back to everyone who's been here before. Wright-Locke Farm, as you know, is Winchester's community farm, and we've been farming since 1638. More recently, since 2007, when the town purchased the land. We've got a lot going on at the farm now. We've been through a number of seasons, and we have lots of activities. Just very briefly, we grow certified organic crops that we sell at the farmers markets, so small CSA in our farm stand. We do a lot around farm-based education, principally for kids, but increasingly for adults. Witness what we're doing here tonight. Also, we have events, lots of different events, both public and private. We try to be a welcoming farm. We try to encourage people to come and participate, either as a visitor, but even better as a volunteer or an active participant in what we do. Because we're supported by our many volunteers and supported by the community. So thank you for that effort. Before I pass the mic over to Kim, I was showing you some images of the farm. Those who are paying attention might have seen some renderings of a building. That is our planned education center. As you can see, we've about maxed out our capacity here for these kinds of events, and we have large plans, exciting plans to build a year-round education facility on the hill and the site of the Yellow House that you walked by on your way in. If you have questions about that, see me afterwards. I'd love to talk your ear off about it. I'm going to introduce Kim Nealand. Kim is our community engagement manager. She also manages our farm stand. And she has been instrumental in assembling our speaker series, not only this year, but also our first year last year. And Kim's going to introduce the series to you and also introduce our speaker tonight. So thank you very much.
So I'm Kim Nealand. You feel free when you're up at the farm. I'm generally here, and I'm always happy to answer questions via email, whatever. I'm kind of the Swiss Army knife of the farm, and I've got my hands in just about everything. So when in doubt, email me. And I know most of you did here today to RSVP, but I have to say this has just been amazing. I started coordinating this series last year, and it's just been amazing to see it grow and to see so many people come here to delve into the topics that we've been including with these series. So thank you again for coming this evening. This is a really great showing. So excited. But I'm just going to say that I just feel really lucky that we've gotten some really accomplished and wonderful speakers in both last year and this year. And, they're generously donating their time and their energy to share their knowledge with us. So it's been really wonderful. And I think it really speaks to the collaborative nature, as well as the enthusiasm around the education here and the strong sense of community at this farm. So again, I'm just kind of like awestruck a little bit. So Daniel Nocera is the Patterson Rockwood Professor of Energy at Harvard University. He is widely recognized in the world as a leading researcher in renewable energy and is the inventor of the artificial leaf and the bionic leaf. The artificial leaf was named by Time Magazine as Innovation of the Year for 2011, and Time Magazine had already dubbed him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world 2 years prior. Professor Nocera's research contributions in renewable energy have been recognized by numerous awards, and we'd be here forever if I tried to list them all off. He's also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the U.S. National Academy of Science, as well as the Indian Academy of Sciences. Currently at Harvard, he conducts a group of student researchers in all areas of expertise to help solve important societal problems, the greatest of which is the delivery of a carbon neutral and sustainable energy supply for the 21st century. So, pretty amazing things going on, I must say. So we are so pleased to have Daniel here today. So I ask you to give him a big welcome onto the barn stage. So
today I'll tell you something about this artificial bionic leaf issue. You kind of get a feeling of what I'm going to do. I spent most of my career at MIT, and you can see I want to destroy the infrastructure. So they kicked me out. So I had to go find a new job. So I went to Harvard. I'll tell you why I'm also at Harvard maybe at the end. So you live in the Holocene. That's the epoch you're in. And what that means, it's been basically the last 10,000 years. And what it means is there weren't a lot of you. So you couldn't alter Earth systems. If you give talks like this, you spend a lot of time on Google looking for images evocative of what you're saying. So she's like a piece of algae, right? So she kind of just blends into the environment. But in the last 50, 60 years, there's so many of you, you've started altering Earth systems. So technically, you're still in the Holocene epoch. But then this new word showed up, which was called Anthropocene. And what that means is there's so many of you, you finally have started making an Earth out of balance. And so that's been, you see pictures like that, all right? Now, what's really driving this, I'm a chemist, so I'm going to give you 3 equations. I actually changed the commercial of Shell because of these 3 equations, because the CEO of Shell used to get up and say, we're drilling and fracking because we've solved the energy problem. And then I had to do this in front of him, and then I noticed, I told my wife at home, now he said, we made it better. He didn't solve it, so because of these 3 equations. But they're instructive. So I can take just water, a glass of water, and I can take coal, because all of a sudden we're a big coal country again, thank God. And I can take coal and react it with water, and I make hydrogen. So that's hydrogen. And hydrogen's a fuel, but you also make some carbon dioxide. And you make 2 units of hydrogen with coal. With natural gas, you can burn it with water, and you make 4 units of hydrogen per molecule of CO2. So in most things we do in life, whenever you use carbon-based stuff, so whether it's coal, that's a code for gasoline, or methane, frac gas, you can make a fuel, hydrogen, but then you make carbon dioxide. And that's what's behind this whole issue of climate change. Now, I decided to put this in, since you're all from New England and you live here, you probably don't know why you benefit, but you all benefit from oil. This whole area, and especially Winchester, and affluent communities in the Northeast. And the reason was, in pre-1800, the United States used to burn tallow. Tallow is, if I go out and kill those goats and I take their fat, I'm not going to do that. Don't worry. But if I were to take their fat or their lamb fat, I would burn it in candles. And it would smell, and it was smoky in the 1800s. And then these guys showed up. So Nantucket exists because of this. And they weren't going for whales, they were going for oil. So Nantucket, and then it got so out of control, the industry was building so quickly, they had to move to New Bedford because, and I still can't figure out who figured this out, but in the nose of a sperm whale, there's oil. And so all that stuff, Widows Walks and that whole Nantucket, New Bedford, New England thing was, you guys were the Exxon Mobil and Shell of the United States. And that's why these people were risking their lives out there, because that oil out of the nose burned odorless and it didn't smell. So everybody replaced animal fat with sperm oil. And I went and looked this up. It took a lot of time, but I actually looked at statistics. In 1846, I found out in America, there were 900 whale ships all over the world, but 745 of them were out of Nantucket and New Bedford. So we owned the oil market. We were the OPEC, or the Middle East of oil, in the mid-1800s. It was the 5th largest industry. Like I said, in Nantucket, got too big, so they had to move across to New Bedford. They made 4 to 5 million gallons a year of oil, and they were shipping it all over the U.S. At that point, it was 220 million US dollars in the middle 1850s. So it was as wealthy and rich as the oil you get today. And all of this, in this community you live in, and all the way down through Massachusetts, is due to one thing. You were the oil kings of the world. It was $200 a gallon, and we were killing 15,000 whales a year. All right? And they were all going to die. And then 2 scientists made an invention. It's unbelievable. But one I don't have here. He was a Canadian, Gessner. And Gessner figured out how to distill kerosene from water. You probably know Dow Chemical. They're in Midland. The reason they're in Midland is they're salt brine wells. They get salt out of it, and they make chlorine. And all through the 1800s, they were trying to get just brine water, and there was always this gooky stuff in it, oil. And they just were throwing it away. They couldn't get rid of it. And so this Canadian, Gessner, figured out how to distill kerosene away from brine. But it was to get brine, because people like Dow would then take brine, which is salt, make chlorine, and still to this day, chlorine is a base chemical commodity that you build the world with. So Gessner was trying to just get oil out of the way, and then this fellow, who was basically a mechanical engineer, Michael Dietz, made a lamp that could burn the oil. And Gessner and Dietz literally saved the whales, because in 1857, you gave up everything and you wanted kerosene, and you wanted, all of a sudden you didn't need the sperm oil, because all that oil people were throwing away from brine you could use in a kerosene lamp. And in 1860, it said that the entire whale community would have been extinct by 1860. They only had 3 years, or you would not have seen whales on the face of the planet. They would have been gone. So these two saved it. The irony is that set up a coal world and carbon-based world, and now just replace whales with you, and I'll get to that later on. You'll have to make a decision, I'm not going to make it for you, of whether you're going to go the way of the whales, almost. And we'll talk about that later on today. Of course, because we went to oil, you got things like this. This was a friend of mine, Gary Brash. It was always depressing. I make all these inventions, and then I talk to the public, and sometimes the public reads about me, but he had way bigger impact than I've ever had in life on the public. He died, actually, 2 years ago. He was swimming off the Great Barrier Reef because he's a photojournalist and was documenting the extinction of the Great Barrier Reef, which is happening as I speak. It will not exist in the next 30 years. It's done. You'll have killed it. By the way, I'll say you. I'm not pointing your finger. I've just decided everybody out there is making such stupid decisions. I dissociated myself from your species. So don't be offended. I just don't want to be included with any of you anymore. So just ignore me. So what Gary did is he took old pictures of glaciers, and this had a huge impact in the world. By the way, this is what Al Gore made his movie of and then politicized it, unfortunately, this whole thing. But Gary, with GPS, just simply went around the world where there were glaciers, and with GPS, he could position his camera exactly. So he positioned his camera exactly in where it was in 1875 and just took a picture. That was it. And look what's happened. The whole glacier's gone. You are an industrious group, though, and I have respect for you. While you're destroying the environment, there's so much water, at least you put a hydroelectric dam in there. So congratulations. But he was an amazing man, and we did a lot together at Aspen Environmental Forum. And it's the power of photography and journalism and the arts. And so I've always loved him for that. But that's what we worry about with carbon. Now, what I'm here to tell you is when you think of sustainability and we think about this farm, this is what you think about sustainability, which is blue earth and greenness. But that's not what I think of. And by the way, I invented this term because I did tell you I went to Harvard. So at MIT, you could just be a scientist. But then I went to Harvard, and there are these things called humanists, which I don't really like that much personally. So I had to make a new epoch so they would respect me. So it's called the Sustainacene. And what I mean by the Sustainacene is you can't have this Earth in a sustainable planet if you have poverty. It's impossible. All right? So if you have poor people, you can't have a sustainable planet. It will cease to exist. And if you don't take care of the poor, you will cease to exist. All right, so now why am I saying that? So I'll now prove it with an equation. I only need to know three numbers, and I can calculate energy. So if I know population, you all need energy. And I can do a calculation. Have you ever calculated how bright a light bulb you are? So watts are energy per time, a burn rate, how much energy per unit. So a 100-watt light bulb is some amount of energy per second, and that's 100 watts. Your 2,000 calories a day, I'll give you 2,000 calories over 24 hours. When you work out the calculation, you are literally only a 100-watt light bulb. You're no different than the 100-watt light bulb in your house. That's what you need to exist. At your house in America, depending on so that's N, but depending on what country you're in, gross domestic product per capita, I can calculate how much energy is around you to exist, just not your existence. So in the US, looking at their GDP per capita, you're 1,000 watts at your house, and then there's 10,000 watts around you, meaning manufacturing, cars, all that stuff. So the average American is 11,100 watts. And so I can go around all over the world, and I've done that. I stay at my desk, I use Google, and I can calculate and then sum up all your energy, and I can tell you precisely how much energy the world's using or how big a light bulb they're burning. But I also have to make an assumption, which is called energy intensity, energy per GDP. So the US last year hit a certain GDP. Then next year, if they hit the same GDP and use less energy, they conserved. If they use more energy, they didn't conserve. And I can quantify that, the amount of energy they didn't use or use. I can quantify, and I can precisely tell people whether they're conserving or not, or countries. And I used to get invited to Davos, and every country would have carbon dioxide limits, and they would invite me every year, kind of in a room like this with all these prime ministers, and I would sit around and just pick out every country and show that they had violated their CO2 target, and then I would tell them, next year you have to slow your GDP by this much to hit your CO2 target. Not one of them ever did it, and then they just stopped inviting me to Davos. That was their solution. But now you see what the real argument is with climate change. It's not about climate change. Anybody who says they don't believe it, they believe it. It's about money. It's that simple. And don't ever get fooled. And it's how much do you want to pay for it? And then we can have widely varying opinions. But almost everybody I know believes in climate change. And the ones who say they don't, they're just being so strident because they don't want to pay too much for it. And I really mean that. So I want you to understand that. There's really no villains. It's just a question of, I'm a liberal, crazy professor with no constituency and no company. Pay huge amounts of money for it. And if I'm a CEO and I have a constituency and there's going to be a plant that shuts down, I have bigger constraints on myself. I don't want to pay as much. So hopefully we'll become adults someday in this country. We won't, and have that discussion. Instead, we just make it a political argument. So doing that calculation, you guys burned in 2012 globally, you had a 16 trillion watt light bulb on. It's on all the time, just like this is on. And I have to give this energy to keep it on. So I give enough energy to keep a 16 trillion watt light bulb on, and 81.2% of it's carbon based with that coal, frack gas, and oil making CO2. In the next 40 years, so a lot of you have grandchildren or kids, literally by 2050, I can calculate with very accurately, you're going to need 16 more terawatts. And that doesn't sound like a lot. 16, just a small number. So this really got me in trouble because then I did things like biomass, and I calculated, I took the arable land mass on the face of the planet, and then what I did, that's okay, don't worry, I'm used to it. Actually, she's making a statement. Boing, boing, boing. Yeah, like he's crazy. That's what usually happens at this part of the talk. Because what I did is I took the entire planet and I put the fastest growing crops on it, and then I burned it to get maximum energy. So if I take carbohydrate or biomass, the maximum energy, CO2 and water, you can't do that technically. If I give you lignin and wood, you can't get the whole way. But I just assumed I can do the calculation on paper. You only get 6 terawatts, right? So it's not going to save you. Corn is worse. Corn, you're not even using it. You're just using the little yellow things, right? And literally, I had death threats from Iowa farmers because I was shutting down a huge revenue stream with this calculation for them, right? I would get death threats every morning from farmers across the country. Makes me happy. Means I'm hitting home. Let's look at nuclear, because people like nuclear. By the way, I like every one of these things here because they're carbon neutral. I'm a carbon warrior. I come from New York. I'm neurotic. So I just worry about carbon. So I like everything that's carbon neutral, but you have to be pragmatic. So look what I just said. If I'm going to get half of my energy from nuclear, I have to build a nuclear power plant every 1.5 days forever. Now, you could say he is off his rocker. Boing, boing, boing. So I'm going to do the calculation for you. A nuclear power plant puts out a gigawatt. We don't build them bigger because it's dangerous. Forget about being in your community. I don't care. By the way, I'm going to put one right here in Winchester. So I'm going to put, they're a gigawatt. I need 8 terawatts. 8 terawatts divided by a gigawatt's 8,000. So I need 8,000 nuclear power plants in the next 40 years. So 8,000 divided by 40 is 200. You need to build me 200 nuclear power plants a year, globally. All right? That means every 1.5 days you need to build me a nuclear power plant for an 8 terawatt baseload. But I said forever, because you don't run a nuclear power plant over 50 years. It's dangerous. So you're going to have to build 40 years of nuclear power plants every day and a half. I'll give you a 10-year break. You're going to have to decommission the one you built me in 2 days from now and rebuild it. That's why you're not going to use nuclear. So you guys have an enormous energy appetite globally. And that's why some people are gaga on solar, because there's 800 terawatts. Again, I can calculate, and this is kind of a depressing thing, but in 1 hour, more sunlight hits the face of the planet than you use in a whole year. So in 1 hour, 16 terawatts of energy hits the face of the planet. and you guys are just throwing it away. All right, so that's one reason. I have a reason that's more important to me if you're a poor person, because I still have to get to this poverty issue. I haven't explained that to you yet. But if you're a poor person, or you're out there on the Winchester Golf Club, when you look up, you both have access to the same energy supply, no matter who you are. And that's powerful. I'll explain in a minute. So let me tell you, how does this connect to the poor? So I'm just telling you, you need a lot of energy. Well, I had to do that calculation and make an assumption about energy intensity. And I made one tiny assumption, that every bit of energy you use today, 16 terawatts as of 2012, you're going to save in 40 years from now. Completely save it. So you'll have become such great conservationists that you save 16 terawatts in 40 years. So that sounds out of whack. You need 16. Now you're saving every bit of energy. You use 16. Why do you need 16 more? Now we get to the poor. There's 1.4 billion people, as I speak, who've never seen an electron in a wire. If I could just do that for them, it would change their lives. There's 1.6 billion low energy users, so that's 3. And in the next 40 years, 3 billion people are showing up in that part of the world. So in my energy calculation, you're getting 6 billion new energy users, and they're driving your energy need. And you're having a little trouble with carbon now. If 6 billion people use your energy infrastructure, forget it. You can't have a sustainable planet. So the key, at least for me and my group, is how do I get the poor energy that's sustainable and not carbon-based? So that's what we wanted to do. Everything I'm about to tell you, you can do today. So that's the beauty. Science has been working. You know, when you're doing what you're doing, all these nerdy scientists are working away. And in the centralized world, I can take water and CO2 and make fuels. It's called Fischer-Tropsch. I can take anything that you want and I can make it. I can take nitrogen from the air and make fertilizer. I'm going to get to that later. That's Haber-Bosch. That's how you do fertilization and grow crops. But you need large centralized infrastructures. What you can't do is in your backyard. If I have the poor, you don't invest in the poor because you need a return on your investment. So you don't invest in the poor parts of the world, thank God, because you haven't given them our energy infrastructure. But they don't have the money, so I can't then go and say, I'm going to recreate this environment. And I'm working with Chicago economists. And right now, with the immediate fossil fuel infrastructure, I'm up to $17 trillion. And that's not homes. All these homes have wires in it. I left out the housing industry. I just did power plants, wires and ground, the grid, oil companies. You have a $17 trillion infrastructure, and you totally paid it off. That's why you're married to it. You would have to be dummies to walk away from a $17 trillion paid off infrastructure. So that's why you'll be the slowest to adopt anything new. It's not you're bad people. You're just pragmatic. You don't walk away from a $17 trillion paid off investment. The poor haven't made that investment yet. So there's real opportunity to have them take a different path in the future. Okay, so actually, I do research, and my students do research. My research is I sit in my office and I do Google plots, and then I run into the group and say, look what I just discovered, and then they walk me back to my desk and they say, we'll keep doing research. So, since they won't listen to me and you're captive, you're going to listen to my new discovery. So what I did is I went on Google and said, how much does a Boeing 77 weigh, and how much did it cost to manufacture? And I just put a dot there. And this was a few years ago. Boeing made 74 777s. Then I did it for etching tools, machine tools, automobiles. That's a manufacturing curve. So I can predict manufacturing costs without getting any details of the technology. I can tell you you'll never be cheaper than $10 per pound. That's kind of interesting. What doesn't this work for? Does not work for IT. I could put some kids on Harvard Yard. They can make some little app Facebook and then destroy the world with it, right? That's a low CapEx investment and you get a high CapEx, so that doesn't work. But that's not manufacturing. Doesn't work for pills, because what do you do when you invest in pills, pharma? You ever think what you're buying? If you're an investor, why do all these people? You're buying hope. It's hope. They're not curing hardly anything, really. But there's hope. There's the magic pill that's going to solve everything. And so you have a massive influx of dollars because you pay for hope. That's fine. Nobody in energy plugs a wire in the wall and goes, please, I hope electricity comes out. So I don't have hope. And I don't have low CapEx. I just told you it's a $17 trillion infrastructure. Low CapEx is low capital expenditure, initial investment to build. So if you don't have hope or low CapEx, you get what are called manufacturing curves. It works for everything. This is not a lie. McDonald's has a chief technology officer. I called him and I said, how much does the patty cost, the tomato, the lettuce, the bun, and how much does it weigh? It comes out perfectly. A Big Mac is $10 per pound. I'm not kidding you. So I just equated an automobile to a fast food. Why doesn't this work in life for us, for the poor? Because you build one big heavy thing like that, I multiply by $10 per pound, and that comes out to $2.2 billion. But then I get investors, you give me money, I set up a return on investment so you can recover your investment and make a profit. And I just told you it's not going to work for the poor because they don't have any money for the initial capital expenditure. So that's why it's not going to work. The other way to think about this is, how about if McDonald's had a business model that's the way we do energy? Did you ever think what it would look like? I always do inverse thought experiments. They would make one huge hamburger. You would all get in your cars, drive to it. You would take a bite out of it, and then you would go home. That would be the equivalent business model that we use in energy for McDonald's. So if you do the other thought, you guys do this, could I build the McDonald's of energy? So could I build a little McDonald's hamburger of energy, hand it out to everybody, have them just look up and use the sun, and then live? So it's a decentralized model. These guys are decentralized. So when you look outside, those leaves, I can tell you, you can already see I have an edge. That's why nobody in Winchester talks to me. It's fine. So I have my friends are the leaves. I just, it's a little weird, but I walk around my neighborhood, talk to the bushes. They talk back to me, and I'm happy. So what do those leaves do? You give all this stuff water. The reason you're giving it water is the leaf takes sunlight and it takes H2O, so water has oxygen and 2 hydrogens stuck to it, and it rearranges water to oxygen and hydrogen, the bonds. I'm going to show you in a minute. That hydrogen at night is combined with carbon dioxide to make biomass. I don't need the sun for that. So what the leaf is doing is using sunlight only to split water to oxygen and hydrogen's a high energy fuel. In the dark, it takes the hydrogen, the CO2 from the air, and it builds biomass. So if I want to be like a leaf, I'm going to have to use sunlight to split water to hydrogen and oxygen, and then I'll have to figure out in the dark how am I going to get hydrogen and carbon dioxide together to do biomass. So that's a fuel. That's gasoline. Gasoline has carbons and hydrogens. You put oxygen, so when you get in your cars, if you don't have an EV, you're going to be putting oxygen into the piston. It then ignites with the carbon, hydrogen, and look, it rearranges to make CO2 and water. And then you take the extra energy. Watch this again. This is 18 hours of PowerPoint. Okay. So, and then you take the extra energy. So what are the leaves doing? They're taking low energy bonds of water, and then they're using the sunlight to rearrange the bonds of water to make high energy bonds of hydrogen and oxygen. That's what the leaves are doing. I'm just going to tell you, since I'm at a farm, You don't realize probably when you eat food, say green stuff, or animals who eat green stuff, did you ever think of what you're chewing? I'm going to show you. So I just told you the leaf splits water to oxygen and hydrogen. I wrote hydrogen in a funny way. The hydrogen combines with CO2 and makes carbohydrate. You eat the carbohydrate. What you just did here, or before you came here, you have the carbohydrate. As I'm talking to you, your body's breaking the carbohydrate back down. The carbon dioxide comes out of your mouth, and it's keeping the hydrogen inside you in a solid form, biological hydrogen. You then breathe oxygen in from the air, which the leaf release for you to breathe, and you combine the oxygen and hydrogen in your mitochondria, in your cells, and that drives cellular energy. And if you look at this, everything here, I had water, I split it. Over here, you're taking O2 and the hydrogen from the carbohydrate and you're making water. When you look at this whole thing, everything cancels. So do you realize that? There's nothing. Everything just canceled. Everything they're doing, you're undoing in your body. And it's exactly the same mass balance. You're not creating any new energy. You're not creating new fuel. All you're doing is taking sunlight, that whole process, which is 2.6 billion years old, is just taking sunlight and allowing you to convert it to a useful form for your cells, called mitochondrial respiration. If you think about it from a physics point of view, there's only one extra mass element I put in here in mass that I've added to the system. Photons. You eat the sun. I want you to understand this precisely. When you bite food and carbohydrate, you're literally chewing a piece of the sun. I'm not kidding you. And you're releasing the sun inside you in a useful way to drive mitochondrial respiration, but you're releasing the sun inside you. So that's what we wanted to do. Now, why did photosynthesis choose water? So I'm going to show you. Here's the Harvard swimming pool. The hardest thing was for me to find out how many gallons of water is in a Harvard swimming pool, 2.8 million. If I could make a little hamburger and use sunlight and take water from the pool per second to hydrogen and oxygen, guess how much energy I can store from the sun? I'm not creating energy, I'm just converting sunlight. How much could I store? 38 terawatts. You guys only need 16. So if I could make a hamburger and operate on 1/3 a swimming pool of water per second globally, I can take care of all of your energy needs for the future with no oil. You're not using the water up. People always worry about that. Once you get the hydrogen and oxygen, you recombine it, take the energy back out, and you get water back. So you're just cycling it. You're not using anything up. Just like you do now with working with photosynthesis. You're not using anything up. You're just converting sunlight into a useful form of energy. So people have been trying to do this for a long time. This is a famous Italian chemist, Chimichon. If you go to the University of Bologna, you'll see the Chimichon Institute. And in 1912, look what he said, if we could figure out how photosynthesis works and masters the secrets of plants, that would be good for us. So Chimichon had already figured this whole problem out in 1912, okay? But nobody had done it because they didn't know how to take care of the garden secret of plants. So I'm just going to tell you quickly how photosynthesis works. Okay. Sunlight comes into the leaf, and then this plant can't get its hands around the sun. So what it does is it separates sun into current. So whether you realize it or not, all those leaves are buzzing with electricity. Just no wires. So sunlight is being converted into electricity. It then uses the electricity, the energized current, to then split water to hydrogen and oxygen. So we said, could we make something, not sure what it will look like yet, when sunlight hits it, I'll get charge separated, moving, so it will be wireless current, wireless moving charge, and then I'll make something and harness the charge and energize it to split water. And we did that. These two things are just coatings. This one splits water to O2. This thing splits water to hydrogen. So I have two coatings now that when I energize them with electricity, they split water to oxygen and hydrogen. But how do I get the sun in there? And that's, by the way, there's one nice thing about this compound. There's a whole bunch of science behind this. These are the first compounds that heal themselves all the time. As long as they're working, we figured out in a chemical way how they always fix themselves on the fly. They're the first self-healing catalyst. Now, why is that important? Anybody, I told you we can commercially split water to hydrogen, oxygen. You need ultra-pure water. Because if you don't, the thing dies. It decays, it corrodes. These catalysts, because they fix themselves, I can use any water source. So we can run out of the Boston Harbor, Charles River. You can run from, if I'm going to the poor, I can't do a huge pure water distribution system. The other thing is sometimes you don't even have this water, but there's one water you do have, if you're living, urine. These work out of urine. So that's important because you always are carrying your water supply. It's also important because the most annoying student in my group at the time, Yogi, who's now a professor at MIT, I made him do the urine experiments. That's how you get back at your graduate students. The other nice thing is if I split urine to H2 and O2 and I recombine it, what do you get? Clean drinking water. So on the side, I have a way to give people clean water from urine to boot. The other thing is I can interface it with materials because all these things do now, if I give them electricity, they split water. But I don't know how to get electricity, and it's got to come from the sun. And because I'm in regular water, maybe I could use biology. I'll show you where I need biology in a minute. So that's the artificial leaf. What we did, the red slab it's a coating. That's the one that makes hydrogen. The green slab is the one that's self-healing, that makes oxygen from any water source. And then what we did, that gray block is silicon. And you know what silicon is? That's your solar panel. So when sunlight hits your solar panel, it's shining on silicon, and then silicon produces current. And then you put wires on it, and you run your house. When the sun goes down, you don't have any electricity. But now with this, sun hits the silicon, it makes a wireless current, it energizes my catalyst, and then I split water to oxygen and hydrogen. So the sun can go down, fine. I can then take the oxygen and hydrogen, recombine them in a thing called a fuel cell, and I can get electricity back. So this is a storage mechanism for silicon, which is your solar panel. It's much cheaper because I didn't have to do all the wiring and soldering. This is just a slab of silicon. It's only 1 micron thick, and I just have coatings on it, 100 nanometers, really tiny. So it's like just coating glass. I can coat silicon with these catalysts. You can take it, drop it in water, here, I'll do it. I wasn't going to do it, but I'll do it here. So this thing's sitting in water. This is just in my window. And now what's happening, the current's going up to the green slab. It's splitting water to O2. The electrons, the other part of the current's going to the back slab, no wiring, no nothing. And then you'll see that's making hydrogen. That's a dumb design. I'm letting them mix. You just put a separator there, take the oxygen and hydrogen off. That runs at the current of the sun. It keeps up with the sun. It never dies. I can split water to oxygen and hydrogen. That's what the artificial leaf is. That's the front end. Remember, that's where I told you you need the sun. So I just did what the plants are doing to take sunlight, rearrange water to make oxygen and hydrogen. Okay. By the way, I'm very proud of this. I submitted to Sundance, Robert Redford's film festival, and I ended up winning over all the Hollywood people for the short film. Thank you. So if you want, just go on Sundance Film Festival website, and I did a little 6-minute movie which won the jury prize at Sundance. And the whole idea here was then he gives you money to make a feature-length film. And I said, no way, I'm not doing that. 6 minutes was so I'm done. But he keeps calling me to make a film. I'm not going to do it. I'm doing it with somebody else. Take the money? No, he's doing it only if I do a film. Actually, Karen knows. I'm doing it with Leonardo DiCaprio. We have a film coming out in a year from now. I decided to let him do it, and I have Robert Redford giving him the money.
He's going to play you.
Huh?
He's going to play you.
Oh, no, I don't know what you're saying. Okay, I said you can get a hamburger. You have a hamburger. The silicon that's the thing that's in your thing. That's your burger. I have a little piece of cheese. That's that thing. Because when you make oxygen, oxygen reacts with silicon and makes sand, SiO2. So I got to protect the silicon cheese. My top catalyst, the one that makes oxygen, top bun, bottom bun, is my other catalyst. It's a hamburger. I can just hand it out to everybody. If they can urinate and look up and see the sun and there's air, they get energy. I'm serious. Huh?
Where do you get the silicon?
From a little place called China. Or as it's now called China, or whatever how he says it. What's he say? China. Unfortunately for you, while he's making America great again, he sold the bank to China. They own all the silicon. They will be the OPEC oil of silicon in the next 20 years, and you're all going to be beholden to them. So congratulations. But neither here nor there, not my problem. I just need silicon, and the Chinese like me, so they give me silicon. So now you guys can get hydrogen from water. So what are you going to do with it? I said you could use it as a fuel cells. But none of these buildings have fuel cells in it. So that's what you do with hydrogen. You blow up balloons. So sometimes if you get too far ahead of society, you can't move it in quickly. All of you are going to say, when can I see this? Well, I have a bigger problem. All my investors then say, Nocera, now I have to convince the world to put fuel cells everywhere? And that's what they did say to me. And they said, bye-bye. Not Mr. Tata from India. He stuck with me. But I ended up doing a different thing. I made a flow battery for you guys that can store 100 megawatts at a power company. I gave it to Lockheed Martin, and they're rolling it out next year. So you'll be able to generate electricity on your roof, send it to wires to our flow battery. Now it's Lockheed Martin. They'll store it at the power company and send it back to you at night, because I use your existing infrastructure. But the poor don't have it. So in the poor, I have to have them all have fuel cells. Too complicated. So what do you use? You use fuel. You take hydrogen and combine it with carbon dioxide, and you make fuel, or carbohydrates, or food. That's what food is. Hydrogen plus CO2, glucose, and carbohydrate. So what we did, this is 2 years ago, I took a bacterium, just a regular old bacteria, a kind of regular old bacteria called Ralstonia eutropha. And there's this field called synthetic biology. We know all these genetic codes. So we genetically engineered the bacteria. We put an enzyme in there called, that's what the nose is supposed to be. I have a big nose, so I always use my own nose for this. And what that bacteria does, the genetic sequence we put in the bacteria says, it's an enzyme called a hydrogenase. And what that hydrogenase enzyme does is it takes hydrogen and it can turn it into protons and electrons. Once I get to split up hydrogen, I can make something called ATP. And ATP is what powers cells. So I am now able to use sunlight. I split water to oxygen and hydrogen. I feed hydrogen into the cell, and that's a way for me to feed the sun into the cell in the form of hydrogen, and it makes ATP, which is cellular energy. So these bacteria only live on hydrogen, no other food. So I just give them hydrogen. As soon as I stop giving them hydrogen, they die. So they only eat hydrogen, my renewable hydrogen from the sun. So I can let them grow. They can just grow wildly. That's biomass. I can collect it. And then what you do with biomass is you convert it to fuel. You go find some chem engineers. But we did something else. We put 4 other genes in here, a machinery, and in this biosynthetic pathway, we said, don't grow. We want you just to live in stasis. Some of you will die, some of you will live, and I'm going to take all your extra hydrogen, and I'm going to make a new synthetic pathway so you breathe in CO2, take my hydrogen, and you excrete liquid fuel. And we did that. And you probably saw this, a guy who graduated from the school I now work at, he tweeted out a year ago, someday humanity will be better than photosynthesis. This is why I like social media. Some kid, it was Bill Gates, so he's always pontificating, and he goes, someday we'll be better than photosynthesis. And some kid sent back he said, hey, dumb shit, a professor at your old school already did it, and did it 10 times better. I love social media. So now he tweets me. I tell Karen, every time he tweets me, you literally get 14 million things, people bothering you. I don't want to know any of them. Okay, so what we're going to do now is use sunlight, split water to hydrogen, have the bacteria eat hydrogen, have it breathe in CO2 and make fuel. We did that a year ago. This is what Bill Gates didn't know. So if I just don't make fuel, I just let them eat hydrogen and grow, this is called solar efficiency. Sunlight in to carbohydrate. So the best growing plants, which are soy, switchgrass, mostly soy and switchgrass, it's 1%. So sunlight goes into the plant, it stores only 1%. Don't get angry at the plants, and they're never going to be better. Because plants are like you eat a lot of food, but you don't try to store it, you use it to live. So that's what plants do. They minimize storage, they need to stand up, but they eat sunlight and they use all their energy to live. Nobody told plants 2.6 billion years, we need you to be oil wells. They would have looked different, okay? So because I could engineer things and my artificial leaf is much better than photosynthesis, my energy efficiency is 10.2%. So I'm 10 times better than any natural photosynthesis, any leaf out there. Now they're all jealous of me, by the way, but I can't help it. This one is, I still talk to them, but they don't talk back now. So this one is isopropanol. You guys use ethanol when you go in and you blend it with your gasoline. That has 2 carbons. This is even better. It has 3 carbons. But isopropanol, you already know what isopropanol is. That's rubbing alcohol. So when you guys get a cut, what do? You put isopropanol on to kill the bacteria. I have bacteria. So the reason why they only go to 7.2% is then they die if I go to a higher concentration. So then, and isopropanol is miscible with water. It's all one mixture. So when you put it out of the bottle, you don't see 2 phases, you see 1 phase. So now I got to go find chem engineers to separate the isopropanol from the water. I have to put heat into the system. That costs energy. So this curve, this blue one, I really like. That's a C6 alcohol. Gasoline has 8 carbons. I'm 6 carbons, and that's immiscible with water. So I can just pour off the alcohol. I don't need any chem engineers. So it's very low cost. And then, just to end, this purple bar is a special one. That's a bioplastic. It's called polyhydroxybutyrate. And I said it's a bioplastic, and I met this very famous environmentalist, and she said to me, could you not use the word plastic? Because that has bad connotations. It's a biodegradable plastic, or let's say biopolymer. Now, what is it? It's an internal fat supply for the cell. So in this one, my organism is going to breathe in CO2 and take my hydrogen from the artificial leaf, but it's not going to make a liquid fuel. It's going to make a biopolymer and keep it inside the cell. And that way I've stored sunlight inside the cell in the form of a biopolymer that the thing could use, and it won't need the sun anymore. I'll show you why that's important in a minute. This is all way better than anything you have now. It's better than growing crops. I'm 10 times better. I need 10 times less footprint. I'm not competing with crops. I have a vat of bacteria over there eating my hydrogen from the artificial leaf. You can keep growing on land. I can do this in the desert. I don't have to, these things breathe in CO2. There's a big energy cost with concentrating CO2. I don't need to do it. They have enzymes called carbonic anhydrases. They suck in the CO2. They eat my hydrogen because of my genetic coding, and they make fuel. So we like this. Since I'm at a farm, what else is in air? So now think, if you're poor, you need my leaf, my bacteria, and you're good to go. You can get liquid fuel. I don't need a big industrial power plant. I don't need a refinery. It's making exactly what you'd get out of a refinery when you dig it out of the ground. What else is in air if you're sitting in the backyard? Nitrogen. And what this farm does is it probably uses fertilizer. Do you use fertilizer? No? Okay, God bless you. So none of your plants are growing very well. That's okay. So, no, I'm sorry. I'm kidding you. So for high throughput farming like ADM, they need lots of fertilizer. So what you do is you take nitrogen plus hydrogen, you make ammonia. Now, the hydrogen you get, unfortunately, is from frack gas, methane. So you make a whole bunch of CO2. Remember I told you you can take methane plus and get hydrogen, but you get CO2. So by the way, 2% of the world's energy supply, you might think is in something cars use a lot, but electricity, 2% of your energy supply is dedicated to fertilizer, feeding people. So this is one of your biggest CO2 producers, is making fertilizer by a process called Haber-Bosch, large centralized plant. So what we decided to do is I said, well, if I got the things to eat hydrogen, I now can give them cellular energy. Can I have them breathe in nitrogen? And I'm going to put genes, genetically encode them to make ammonia and solid biomass from air. So we did that. This has all happened in the last 6 months. So here's a bacteria. This is called a xanthobacteria. We encoded it with genes to take hydrogen from the artificial leaf. Remember, sun plus water, so I'm sustainable. The hydrogen is eaten by this guy. It has my hydrogenases. It breathes in carbon dioxide from the air, and that's the biopolymer. So now that big white thing is just a big plastic blob inside the cell. It doesn't need to see sunlight anymore, right? If you think about it, I've already used the sunlight to fix sunlight, the hydrogen with CO2 to make the fuel. This bacteria now can go in the ground and live, and it's going to eat its cell. It's going to eat that biopolymer to live and to do cellular processes. The other thing we put in there is an enzyme called the nitrogenase. Nitrogenases take N2, way back here, N2 plus hydrogen to ammonia. That's an enzyme that does that. But it's going to get its hydrogen from this biopolymer, because the way I made the polymer was H2 plus CO2, the polymer. It then starts eating the polymer. It lets go of the CO2 and it keeps the hydrogen inside. It then feeds it to the nitrogenase, the little machine in the thing to take nitrogen and hydrogen and make ammonia. So that's what Kelsey did. We use the artificial leaf, sunlight, plus water. Again, totally sustainable, any water source. I can use urine. Make hydrogen. This thing breathes in CO2, but doesn't make a liquid fuel. It makes this biopolymer. It then keeps it inside, and then it draws on this. I don't know why I lost the animation. But it draws on this, and that's the energy supply to fuel this nitrogenase to make ammonia. So I can now take the bacteria, load it up with the bioplastic from the sun. It doesn't need to see the sun. I can put them in the ground, and it can literally breathe nitrogen in from the air and do direct fertilization, totally sustainable. So those are radishes. Never knew why. I'm not an agronomist. You use radishes because first you have root mass you want like basically leaves to root mass, you want that. And then radishes take only 1 month to grow. So if you're an agronomist, you can't spend like a year waiting for your orchid. So you use radishes. They're just really fast growing. So they're called a model crop. So those radishes have my bacteria in the ground. They've been solar primed with food. And now they're working in real time, and I don't need this massive Haber-Bosch plant, and I'm not using methane. They're breathing nitrogen in from the air, and they're directly fertilizing the plants. It's a living biofertilizer. This weight increases 300%. We now are up to 1,440% by weight, 14 times the weight of crop yields. And again, all in your backyard, just sunlight, air, and water. That's it. So I can give the poor a way to eat now and do crop fertilization in their backyard. So now they can make, they have urine. Do they have enough urine? Hopefully. But they have to have water. I mean, you can't get away from water. But the real key is they have any water source they have, right? Yeah, you can't get away from water. I need the hydrogen from water, right? That's liquid of life, so there's no way to avoid that. But the fact that I can use any water source has really opened up the playing field. And so if I have the artificial leaf, any water to make hydrogen, and then I have these engineered organisms, they can eat the CO2 and make fuels, and they can eat the nitrogen and make fertilizer, so you can do food. By the way, all my kids always want to make money. I don't ever care to. Now that we're an all-pot state, this is a money maker. Sustainable marijuana. I'm going to be able to price it 10 times over the market value. So that's what I wanted to tell you. But I want to end in a happy note. Because I was telling you all these challenges you have for these kids in 40 years from now. Look what they're up against. So just before he died, I give a lot of public lectures at Aspen and stuff like that. So I would give talks with him sometimes. And then he came up to me, and he always heard me saying, the planet, the planet, the planet. You know, I always did, we got to take care of the planet. And then he came up to me one day, this is only like a year before he died, and he said to me, Dan, the planet is a living organism. And she's beautiful. Just like any living organism, she has an immunological response system. So what your immune system does when something's invading your body, your immune system kicks in. And when you're sufficiently compromised, it eliminates the irksome intruder. And so he said to me, don't worry, as we carelessly, I wrote this down precisely what he said, as we carelessly choose a path to suffocate the planet in CO2, not worry, the planet's immunological system will respond, eliminate all humans, and the planet is going to be just fine. And it will keep looking like that. So whatever you do, I don't care. When I go to bed at night, that makes me super happy. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. The question is, I mentioned I have things that heal. My catalysts, they're dead, inorganic things, but they heal themselves. And the question is, am I working for healing in other things, like your body? So that's kind of what medicine's supposed to be doing, and I'm so overwhelmed with this problem, I haven't really worried about you guys. By the way, I need to lose around 3 billion of you, and it would make my problem easier. So I just want to lay that out on the table. Because you're all using energy, and I just need to get rid of around half of you. And maybe the planet does too, because she's having trouble keeping up with us. But let me tell you what you're saying. I actually have healing in the biology here. It's not the one you want, because you want to live forever. But what's happening here is some of the organisms die, and when they die, they release everything, their phosphorus and nitrogen, and then other ones that are being born take it up. And so when this is running, it just runs steady state. Then I take all the extra stuff and make fuels. So this is even healing, because the organisms, just like any living organism, some die and then others are born, and we balance the death rate to the birth rate. So it just stays the same. But I have not figured out how to make you heal yourself all the time. That's what medicine's supposed to be doing. I'm sorry. But let me tell you what this idea of... Okay, I'll try. I'll think about it. Yeah,
Yeah, my question was, you said it's basically all about the money, which I believe would be true.
yeah.
Is there a way for large companies to make as much money using these processes that you have developed as they do from extracting fossil fuels from the
Yeah, so it's all about money, and then the question is, can people make money off of this so it's attractive than digging it out of the ground? And the short answer is no for you guys. Because you've spent $17 trillion and paid it off, that's what's really behind this. There is nothing any scientist or science is going to invent that's worth $17 trillion for free. So it will always be cheaper to dig it out of the ground. Always, always. So the only way to stop it is you need policies, if you are so inclined as a population, to start pricing it. You may want to do that. So, for instance, you are putting a lot of CO2 in the air and there's water rise. And you guys are going to spend a heck of a lot of money in the next 40 years to make sure your cities don't flood. And I know the largest engineering company in the world, he did the big dig, they invited me to their board meeting. They told me in the 40s and 50s they were great at water engineering. They've lost all their expertise and they see it as their biggest growth market in the future. So you guys are going to pay, once the oceans are going up, you're seeing more and more infiltrate. Once New York City and Wall Street's going to go down, you're going to spend huge amounts of money to water engineer off the coast, right? In Nantucket and everywhere. So you should be pricing carbon. That gets to a political discussion. If you don't want to, I don't care. I mean, as a society, that's the only way. But for the poor, this is price competitive. So I didn't tell you, but everything I'm doing now is all being done in India, rural China, and Africa. And I'm moving all this technology there, not here. So the question is, like, I put biopolymer in there, and then the bug eats it. As it's eating it, it's making fertilizer. So it depends on how much I put in there. We've done 7 crop cycles. I'm thinking of getting bacteria and even loading them up more. What's good about that, a lot of people worry. So first, it's not a GMO, all right? It's a GMO, but it's not in your food. This is a fertilizer, so there's no genetic stuff ending up in the food, just like you guys use fertilizer. So that's not a GMO food issue. And everybody's worried, Nocera's crazy bacteria get out there, we're all gonna die. As soon as they run out of biopolymer, they die. So I have like a self-regulated mechanism. The ones making fuel, as soon as I stop giving them hydrogen, they die because that's their only food source. I've messed these bacteria up so badly that they can only live off of hydrogen and the biopolymer inside them. Once they're gone, they're dead. So you don't need to worry too much about that. So what type of fuel I have? Yeah, I have what's called isopentanol and isohexanol. It's an alcohol that has 6 carbons and 5 carbons with one difference from fuel. One hydrogen has an OH. I didn't show you, we just finished a study where I'm making literally C8s, which is gasoline, and I'm making C10, 12s, and 14s, which is diesel and jet fuels. So I'm doing that now. These are real fuels, and what you're pointing out is an important thing. Before I had hydrogen, I needed a fuel cell. With this, you burn it just like a fuel. Yep. So the question is, I turned my computer off. I knew, everybody always asks me, when's it going to go into market? When are we going to see it in the world? So I'll tell you the short answer. I've taken this, when I moved to Harvard, I cut a deal with Harvard and said, everything I do, I own, meaning the intellectual property. Harvard doesn't. Because the schools always try to cause you to have IP, and they want. So, and then they said no, and I said, well, I'm not coming here. And then they said, okay. So I own the IP. And so Harvard can't touch it. So I've given it to the Institute of Chemical Technology in India. And in India, that's one of the best chem engineering schools. And they're making pilot scale-ups, like I did with Lockheed, but smaller scale. Then what you still need is distribution. But since I'm not putting my fingers in there and skimming money, nor is Harvard, large industrialists have shown up, and this is a pretty easy decision for them. They go to ICT and they say, I'll give you $20 million, ICT, make it, and then it goes right into their company. They don't have to pay me or Harvard. So for them, all it is they just have to basically take their R&D budget, and I'm talking about very famous people, and redirect it to this, and then whatever's developed, they own. I don't. And that's working out very well. So if I had to raise 20 million from an investor now, it would take a year of finagling. I was over in India and raised 20 million in 1 hour because they said, wait, this sounds too good to be true. I'm going to give 20 million and I get it all back. And I said, yes. So it's a new way to do an investment model in the developing world, and it looks like it's working out well. But that's an experiment, and we'll see how well it works. Yeah. What would happen if you price carbon? Then you would have a bunch of investors show up because they see real opportunity, but not at the price point of off the ground. They know they can't compete with digging it out of the ground. So all that would do is stimulate investment, and those investors would drive the technology. Now, I can assure you that would happen because the flow battery I made, which I basically gave, again, that technology, the part I owned I could give, I gave to Lockheed Martin. Those guys are commercializing it. And so everybody always says, how are you going to compete with the oil companies? The way you compete with the oil companies, you have other large corporations because they say, that's a 7 or 8% growth market for me. So as soon as you guys decide to price carbon, this is all going to take off in this part of the world. If you don't, it will never take off, except for one thing. It's going to take off two ways. Once you see poor Indians in Africa living better than you, you're going to get jealous. I really think jealousy is important. The other thing is you are so susceptible, and it's come out in the New York Times in the last few months, like Russia has all of our coding. They could turn every light off instantaneously right now as I speak. They don't because they know it would cause a war. But you are so susceptible, it's so easy to do, and they have all the coding. And we probably do too. So when you have a large centralized infrastructure, your energy system is massively vulnerable. And if something like that happens, I think it will wake everybody up. So the question is, did I have to do the genetics myself?
I think molybdenum and...
Yeah, oh yeah. All the inorganic stuff, the cobalt, all those things I created. Then that was a bunch of science. And then the genetics, the synthetic biology, the genetics have become so powerful, like the Broad Institute at MIT and all these places. It's almost like mix and match.
CRISPR.
You know, CRISPR, yay, CRISPR, gene editing. So there are all these new methods where you can just take genes out and slice them together, and it almost that's why they call it synthetic biology. It's kind of like electrical engineering with circuits, but instead of resistors, and you're doing it with genes. And it's very predictable. So that's this power of synthetic biology. And that might help you live forever because people are now encoding, can we get rid of disease or genetic mutations? I mean, so that's people are using synthetic biology for lots of hopefully biological advances like you were worrying about.
What about population control?
Population control. Okay, that's why you're not all that serious. All we have to do, so there's two ways to control population. I already told you I just want to lose 3 billion of you through famine, nuclear war. I'm not afraid of it, helps me. But there's an easier way, if you were really serious. Educate poor women. And nobody cares enough to do it. It's been shown every time, as soon as you educate the poor, you give them GDP, which I can do with energy, birth rates drop like a rock. Now look, there's so many ways to go. There's stuff like we're talking about, right? There's policy issues. Some of my kids do that. That always disappoints me. This stuff is more important. But it is, because discovery is important. I mean, we've given that up in the United States because we've become a service-based economy and we forgot like discovery actually drives stuff. But again, not my problem. If China's doing it, I hang out with China. I really mean it's a global problem. That's where I'm not US-centric. But the whole renewable, this idea of renewable energy, there's so many ways to go. Batteries, right, for electrifying. There's just anything renewable you should be thinking about with some foresight. First, not to make it political. It's all about money, and then understanding that versus making it some political cause, because it really isn't a political cause. It's a financial one, and you just have to develop and invent to make it cost competitive as much as you can so that you don't have to price carbon as high. Yeah.
Can devices and organisms that breathe in CO2 do enough of it to capture enough carbon to reverse global warming?
Yeah. No, not what I'm doing. So because we have too much CO2, so could we sequester it? So I'm not sequestering, right? Because what I'm doing is taking CO2 and hydrogen, I make a fuel, you burn the fuel, you put the CO2 back. So I'm neutral, I'm carbon neutral. I'm not pulling it out that you never see it again. That's where the oil companies have done a lot, I have to tell you. They don't do it because it would make their oil more expensive, but they do what's called carbon capture. They know how to, geologists, shoot it in the ground, pressurize it, liquefy it, turn it into rock. And all the big oil companies are really far down the road in doing that. Why aren't they? Because that makes their product more expensive. So unless they're forced to with policy, they're not going to do it. But that's probably the best way to do sequestration, is geological. But they're just not being forced to do it because we don't have the policies in place to do it. I will tell you, I can't say the company, but I have an NDA, but one of the largest oil companies in the world, I'm on a board for them for CCUS, and the stuff they're doing is amazing. But they'll never implement it if they don't have to. So the question is, like, why is this so hard to build an infrastructure? And it's because NGOs are really nice people, but they don't have massive wealth. Like, we're talking about a massive, costly infrastructure. So NGOs, VCs, angel investors, they can't do it. Medicine, because I told you, there you're willing to pay to do it, and IT is low CapEx. But once you get to something this costly, which is infrastructure, you need industry and you need the private sector to drive it. They're the only ones with the money that have the capacity to drive it. There's no NGO that has $17 trillion. That's the real problem. Yeah. So the algae I had on my slide, I just blew over it. The best algae or microalgae, they're 3%. So I'm 3 times better than they are, meaning I need 1/3 the footprint. For crops, since I'm 10 times better, 1/10 the footprint. I just did the calculation this morning because I was on a student's PhD exam, and then their intro, they totally messed it up, and then I destroyed the kid during the exam, but they got their PhD, so it's fine. But I calculated for the United States, you would need around 1/2 of this area of New Mexico. Actually, I can give you the exact numbers I just calculated this morning. I need 22,000 square miles. Now, that sounds like a lot. So then what I did is I said, I wonder, since we're a big coal mining country again, makes me proud, I said, I wonder how much surface area the coal mines take up in America. 13,000 square miles. I only need 22. I then took the US roadway system and infrastructure, 32,000 square miles. That puts it in perspective for you. It's not, you can easily do it. And I'm a factor of 10 better. So that means I need 10 times less the footprint. So in my calculation, I did it for a 10% system, which is my system, 10%. The reason why you need so much with biomass is it's only doing 1%. So I need lots of area because I'm only to get enough sunlight at a 1% conversion, but I'm 10%. No, what I would need is my area is my artificial leaf, the silicon coating. That's collecting the sun. That would then split water to hydrogen, which I would go into a vat. So the surface area, here's a way to look at it. I would need, like your house, you think about the size of a house with solar panels to run the house, and you're usually oversized, you're not using it, you're selling it back during the day. That would be the area I would need to do what I'm doing.
So
Because I'm stuck to the silicon efficiency. Yeah. So what I'm using to do my calculations is so important. I'm using an 18% silicon efficiency. My biology, water splitting's at 80%, and the biology's at 80%. So I'm running at around 65 to 70% of my silicon efficiency. So what he's saying is you guys use silicon, and sunlight to silicon commercially, the world record's up with silicon at around 26%. Commercially, it's 18 to 20%. That's what he's saying. But NASA, you know when you see NASA unfurl their things, they're using a really expensive photovoltaic that can run 40 to 50%. So if I were to use that in what I'm doing, I would jump up to like 30%. So I would go from 10 up to 30. But that's much more expensive. All right, well, thank God. It's coming, so that will make all my life better. Isn't that nice? I'm serious.
Yeah. Thank you very much.